You are in for a real treat this afternoon when you meet Bonnie Warington. I am Ramona Morris. I met Bonnie shortly after she came to town. We were in a writing class together. We chewed over what to do with words and what not to do with words. And eventually we were meeting for coffee and becoming acquainted. And now we are friends. But we're nothing alike. The more I discovered about Bonnie, I realized I'm not like Bonnie. I am a middle-of-the-road person. I go right down the middle. But Bonnie knows about the middle of the road, but she's got her eye on the edge in case there's something exciting happen, and she wants to be a part of it. For instance, let's see now, our personalities aren't alike either. I'm the kind that gets a conversation going, and if it lags, I'm going to be pitching in there to keep it going. I've always got something to say. But Bonnie is quiet. She sits back and does a lot of listening, and then when it's time, she speaks up, and that's when she tells her tale. And I can tell by the look on her face, she's ready to tell that tale now. So why don't we become the listeners, and I will introduce you to our author, Bonnie Warington.
I stand here alone, but there is a crew of people behind me that have made this all possible. And you've noticed the table with the alpha writers. They do a coffee and cookie reception for authors, and they've done several, and for their own, so I am included in their own. And then Ellen Ellsbury is responsible for many of the things today. The venue, the place, the wine and cheese, the publicity, internet, newspaper. I am just amazed. I looked that word up, and it's proper. It means wonder and admiration. So I feel justified in using that. So welcome to the back, behind the scenes look at my book. Serendipity doesn't knock, answer the door anyway. Now, serendipity is a word that doesn't come up in ordinary conversation. I found it several years ago. It was when I lived in Phoenix. In Scottsdale, Arizona, there's an avenue especially for boutique hunters. The winter snowbirds come, the local people come. And on this, if anybody came to Scottsdale, nod your head. Ah, okay, yeah. We're talking to you. On Fifth Avenue shops, there was one gift shop that had wonderful gift items. They were so imaginative. And the name of the store was Serendipity. So I asked the clerk, what does this mean? And she said, it means a surprise waiting around the corner. And I pondered that in my heart. I thought, someday I'm going to use that. And when I started putting together the collection of my stories of my life, I thought this is a good explanation of all the different things that have happened to me. There was a knock, whether I heard it or not, didn't matter. I opened the door. I'm going to see what's there. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about my family. This won't take long. I had Dad, Mom, and me. I was an only child. Well, I did have a sister. But we were 13 years apart in age, and we never had the same experiences as children or as adults. So I was raised alone, she was raised alone. We finally met. No. She read my book, got acquainted. So in December 1940, my dad, who was in the Army Reserves, This is December 1940. And the Army sent him to Denver, Colorado, where he would be assigned to Fitzsimmons Army Hospital. So he went on ahead, and Mother and I came along behind, and on the back page there's a little paragraph about that. The Daylight Express left the Cedar Rapids train depot at midnight, and I nestled beside my mother for the overnight trip to Denver, where our life as camp followers began. At 1940, at the age of 9, I went with my parents to Army posts around the United States for 6 years. Now, December 1941, my dad's reserve status was changed to for the duration of the war after the bombing of Pearl Harbor. In my little mind, I thought we would be staying in Denver forever at that time. But back in Washington, the Army twirled their Rolodex and sent Dad to Vancouver, Washington, to Barnes Hospital. And in the category of It's a Small World, Bob Gonzalez of Osage, Iowa, was stationed there as an Army medic. And years later, when we were talking about our past, we found out that we'd been there at the same time. And he says he remembers seeing a little girl in the church pew in the chapel. So what a connection. Well, after the war, we moved to Minneapolis, and Dad was the chaplain at the Minnesota Soldiers' Home. And I finished high school there. So in 1949, I entered Luther College as a freshman. And so did Harold Warington, a farm boy from Osage. So we met and had wonderful visits together and thought maybe this could last. But just a month after that freshman year, the North Koreans invaded South Korea, and he was eligible for service. Now, at that time, his father had surgery and was recovering from that, so Hal had a deferment of 2A so that he could take care of the farm. So one day, Harvey was going down the street and met the guy from the Selective Service. And he said, "How you doing, Harvey?" "Just fine." Not a good time for a polite response. Within days, Hal was reclassified 1A. And within months, he had enlisted in the United States Navy. Now, he was sent to boot camp in San Diego. And because he had had college, from boot camp, they sent him to technical schools, while his buddies then went to the Pacific. So he ended up with an assignment at the Tucson River, Maryland, which is only 60 miles south of Washington, D.C. Now, watch for the serendipity moment. I remembered that I had gotten a letter from Selective Civil Service recruiting people to come and work in the offices in Washington. I remembered the letter. I dug into my little scrap pile for it and found it. So I answered their ad. It said, "Jobs available in Washington. We want you." And I went. Everybody has had a moment when they have left home for the first time as adults. You leave home. And I have a little story about when I left home. Waiting for me at the depot in Minneapolis, Dad showed his dadness, standing tall, broad-shouldered, arms crossed to balance his posture. He exchanged small talk with Uncle Henry, speaking in a calm voice about anything other than emptiness on a house to which he would return. And I said, no, it's going to be okay. Everything's arranged. I have a hotel reservation. I have a job waiting for me. I'll be working next week. It's going to be fine. And Uncle Henry filled in the blank spaces of conversation with knowing nods and many yes indeedies, holding up his end of a spoken word, and in general, providing support for parting father and daughter. Mother hadn't come to the station with us. She needed privacy to express her emotion. Her burst of tears after breakfast surprised me, because she had always met life-changing experiences with stoic resolve. Why had my leaving affected her so much? With insight gained later from years of experience raising my own family, I now perceive the difference between the constant, when you endure changes together, and the unexpected, when one part of your family is subtracted. So I had a very nice job in Washington. I worked at the Navy Annex, and Hal would come in on weekends and we'd go sightseeing together. So the first thing we chose to do was to go up in the top of the Washington Monument, because from the windows you could see the whole city. We thought, get an overview. Now I know where we are. I think it was hazy that day. We didn't get a real bright idea. But a Park Service officer gathered us for orientation and concluded with, there is an elevator ride, 10 cents, or you can take the stairs, which are free. No, we were no dummies. We took the elevator. We thought, well, this would be an easy way up. And we'll go down the steps, it would be easy way down. And why we thought that, I do not know. Was it because the guidebook said there were less than 1,000 steps? Well, it seemed doable. However, we weren't prepared with preconditioning. We were not in training. It was dreadful. We saw a lot of plaques along the wall that they're just plastered with plaques from states and stones from important places. And it's wonderful. We were among the few to see them. The summit had window views in 4 directions. We turned into human pinballs as we bounced back and forth, trading places with fellow tourists at the lookouts. Now, in those days, we did not have, long distance focus. Things were very far away. But I did keep one picture, page 38. It's a view towards the Lincoln Memorial. And along the reflecting pool, there are rows of temporary office buildings left from World War II. And it's documented. They were there. So for the next week, I had a really hard time walking, and I would have given anything if a canteen would have delivered my coffee to the desk instead of walking down there for my favorite donut. Hal had one transfer. We went from Maryland to Annapolis, Maryland, and he was there for 1 year. He worked as a link trainer operator. Anybody familiar with that term? Basically, it's like flight control. He talked pilots down for landings because they had to practice in a closed canopy, relying on instruments. So he was their connection to the ground. That one time he said, it feels kind of funny telling officers where to go. Well, we had a baby while we were there in Annapolis. He was born at the Annapolis, the Academy Hospital. And I thought that was very significant. Well, he was only 3 weeks old at the time Hal was going to be discharged from the Navy. They had moved up the discharge plans because there was pre-peace in Korea, armistice. And so we had to leave earlier than we planned. And here was this little 3.5-week baby. Well, before leaving Annapolis, we took him to the hospital for a checkup, usually done at 6 weeks, but expedited to account for our moving schedule. After the routine tests, the doctor told Hal to carry the baby to the X-ray room. The pictures confirmed suspicions raised after he had listened to David's heart with his stethoscope. He has a heart murmur, but don't worry, sometimes they outgrow it. Well, little David and I went home by plane. Hal drove. Hal drove us to Washington, D.C., to National Airport, and we boarded a super Constellation, known as a Connie to those who know it better. And in those days, you could sit anywhere you wanted. There were no reserved seats. I was the first to board because I had the baby. And a stewardess suggested that I sit in the forward cabin. Nowadays it's called first class. Not necessarily, because you're right in front of the propellers. This is a 4-propeller airplane, and it's very noisy. This cabin was fitted out quite differently. There were 2 L-shaped lounges on either side of the cabin. So I took the short seat side facing forward. I could see the captain when the curtains were parted. And I laid David on the long lounge on the side. And this is how it went. Now, there were, in the corner, there was a corner table between the 2 sides of the lounge. There was a basket of artificial flowers and a bird cage. And in the bird cage was a parakeet. And he was chirping excitedly from perch to perch, waiting for the plane to get up in the sky. And I thought, oh, we're going to have a very entertaining flight. When we got up to cruising speed, he went to sleep and put his head under his wing. So Hal's dad had arranged for us to rent a farm in North Springs. The deal was all made. All Hal had to do was sign his name. I was a little, or shall we say angry, I was, because I was hoping that Hal could get a job in electronics and be in the big city. But this was all arranged. His dad was expecting it, almost had car and gear when I got home to drive over and sign the contract. So, of course, it did happen. And we lived on that farm for 9 years, 8 good years, 1 bad. The first year, 1956, we had drought and depression. And last year, when I named out the years that were as bad as drought, that year came up, 56. So we spent many years there. It was a character building time. Many things happened while we were there. Now, to kind of explain how I got into the field of art, this is going to explain it. At the age of 2, David became a tag-along mother's helper. As soon as he could walk, I had to buy him a toy broom so he didn't grab my mop to help me clean house. Not a tray of cookies went into the oven without his helping hands to shape the dough. I felt like we were mismatched Siamese twins. I need to talk to someone over 3 feet high. My opportunity came when my friend Donna Campbell came over with her little 3-year-old so our children could play together. And she said she was going to take an adult class over in Mason City. And I said, I'll go with you. I didn't care what it was. It was an art class. And that's how I started painting. Adult education with real adults. So I was pretty happy about that. Now, after many years, during these years we were on the farm, David was seen by some specialists from the University of Iowa Hospital. They had a traveling clinic. They would go around the state, and you could make appointments at the nearest stop. Ours was Charles City, and I took him down there once a year to have his heart checked, hoping they said I could grow out of it. When is it going to happen? Well, every year they said, oh, he's doing well, no restrictions, bring him back next year. Well, this went on until he was about 7. And the doctor said, well, we're going to do a procedure and find out just what is causing that murmur. And they found it was a hole between the bottom 2 chambers of the heart. And they said, well, we can do surgery. We can correct that. I was excited but scared, and I went home to talk to Hal. And when he heard the word operation, he said, no operation. Don't bring it up again. So I had to carry that alone. But one day, a public health nurse came to our house on the farm and said, now, why haven't you signed these papers for his surgery? And she explained to him about how this would all happen, and the procedure, the doctors, the attention, the care. And because it came from a professional, he listened. I think I told him the same thing. This time he took part in the discussion and signed the papers. So David had open heart surgery on February 14th. Very significant day. We were to stay on the farm for just a short time later, a lot longer, because Hal had hurt his back lifting, I think probably an iron anvil or something. It was bigger than he was. So he had a lot of trouble with his back. And he said, you know, I think I'll change jobs now while I'm young. Because if I wait till I'm older, what kind of a job could I get? And I could do some electronics now. So I'm going to take some classes in Mason City, brush up, and we're going to leave the farm. 1 year before that happened, it only happens on March 1st. Rental farmers change on March 1st, so the cows still have somebody to feed them while everybody else scrambles. A friend of mine called me up one day, and she said, stop in at the newspaper office. I could hear the urgency in her voice and wondered if it had anything to do with the death of Vivian Moose a few days earlier. Reuben and his wife owned and operated the Norris Springs Advertiser, a weekly paper. Vivian's sudden heart attack threatened the existence of the paper unless someone was found to replace her as editor. So our mutual friend told Reuben that I knew how to type. It helped get me an interview. So he and I sat down in his office and he discussed the situation. They had worked together for 25 years and he wanted to continue publishing because he was too young to retire and too old to go into another business. After a general get-acquainted conversation, he said, do you want the job? Well, I said yes. I knew I wouldn't go on. Yes, I'll take the job. And that morning I was only wondering which book to read or what cookie to bake, and suddenly I was picked to become a professional editor. They gave me a week's sit-in with their substitute lady who showed me how to count words in the title so that it would fit, how to lay out titles, and how to edit. There are a lot of codes for editing, some of which I remember, not all. And I was on my own. I was on my own as an editor of the paper. And I did that for 1 year. And Reuben said he didn't mind if it was a year, because he only worried about next week's copy. Would it go out? Well, it did. And a year later, he had time to find somebody else. So he was happy, I was happy. And off we went. We went to Phoenix. Hal's college roommate had moved down there. And when Hal said he was looking for a job, he said, oh, there's lots of jobs down here. This is technical heaven. Come on down. Well, it was, but it wasn't. The jobs were there, but the personnel directors would not hire you if you had not lived in Phoenix during a summer. They'd had too many snowbirds coming down and think they could do it, and they couldn't handle it. And Hal said, well, it can't be any worse than loading hay in a barn in July. So we did it. Now, there's a wonderful story here about Hal getting a job with General Electric. He worked in their industrial automation department. They would automate plants such as steel mills, oil refineries, utility plants, textile mills. He worked on them all. But when you work for a big company, they also can move you. So our first move was to Virginia, and that's where I finished college. Then it was at Radford College in Virginia. David graduated from high school, and then one day, Hal came home from work early and said, sit down, we have to talk. I've been given an overseas field assignment to South Africa. I worked on programs to automate a steel mill in South Africa, and I could be there for 6 months. On assignments that long, the family has to go along. And then he was telling me, the con, because of apartheid, an incident at Sharpsville turned into a massacre of black civilians. Now, Sharpsville was not very far from the steel plant. The situation can change between now and then. It'll take 2 years before the computers are shipped. But before they can make this assignment official, they have to know whether my family will go with me. It wasn't Paris, but it was overseas. My optimistic spirit knew conditions would change before we went. I didn't want to miss out on a foreign life, no matter where. What an opportunity. I gave Hal my go-ahead answer. Of course, we'll go with you. So upon arriving in South Africa, we lived in a small town where the steel mill was located, Vanderbilt Park, and we stayed at a hotel until we could locate an apartment. So the Killarney Hotel was our launching pad in Vanderbilt Park. The lobby, modest inside, had palm plants at the entrance to their restaurant and a red oriental rug in the lobby hinted that guests had arrived at a fashionable establishment, at least in the lobby. So the next morning when we came down for breakfast, we came down the grand staircase, and maids started their day by cleaning the lobby carpet on their hands and knees with whisk brooms and dustpans, which sent up clouds of dust. The absence of vacuum cleaners seemed a primitive way to do housework, but the abundance of cheap labor made high-priced appliances unnecessary. Handwork provided jobs for millions of black people. We drove past a construction area in Johannesburg where 20 blacks stood side by side to dig a trench. Although at the time we saw them, they were leaning on their shovels. A machine would have been more efficient, but would put many men out of work. And while we were there, David attended the university in Johannesburg. So he had his apartment in town, and we'd pick him up when we went on a sightseeing trip and spend the weekend together. So we really didn't see much of him. He had a an apartment on a high-rise, a cleaning lady, a lady who could do his laundry, and a penthouse restaurant where you could get a hot breakfast, and you could walk to school. He didn't really need to come home. He was taken care of. Now, let's see. I wanted to use my time in South Africa to write, to do some background work on Black education in art in South Africa. And I would write a thesis on that for my master's degree. So I gathered information here and there to use when I got back. Oh, one time I went to an art gallery and I said, "Do you have native art?" Well, they pull it out of storage, but it's not on show. But if you ask for it, they will carry it. So I looked at them and she said, "You know, if you really want to see a lot of Black art, the Standard Oil has them in their lobby. Why don't you go over there and have a look?" So I went to the Standard Oil Tower, took the elevator to the 24th floor, and when I got out, yes, there was a beautiful statue just facing you as you came out, a beautiful Mona statue, and paintings on the wall. So I was kind of looking around, and the lady said, "Can I help you?" Oh, I said, "I'm just looking." Well, I really had to have a better excuse than that to come into an oil office. So I said, "Well, I am doing some work for my college back in America." America. That opened doors. She showed me every painting on the 24th floor, no matter what room it was in. So I did get a wonderful overview that day. So I came back, did my master's degree. David started college. He had been thinking that he would teach science, because he loved his science teacher. He was going to teach science. But in Africa, he had a chance to do extracurricular activities, and he signed up for the drama club. And they wrote that had all the different jobs in the club. He checked every one of them. And by the time he left, he had done every one of them, including directing a one-act play. So when he came back, he changed his major. He was going to be in speech and drama. And wonderful story about him getting his first job. He worked in public television and almost the rest of his life. So he did get into the field that he liked. So glad for him. And as we returned, I was going to go back to college, finish up this program, write my thesis. And one day I noticed a classified ad, and on a whim, I answered it. It was an ad for a receptionist at the Travel Masters travel agency. So I answered the ad in a very carefree way. I answered the questions rather breezily, and I thought, well, that's that. At least I've showed off some of my foreign travel, and that was reward enough. That's all I really wanted. So I got a call that weekend. Mr. Schwartz said, "Did you know that I had 2 jobs open?" No. Wondering now what's going to happen here. "I have a job as a travel agent, and I would like you to take that position." So I took 2 days of training with the co-owner on how to use the airline guide, how to write an airline ticket, and the terms of trade. Every trade has their own vocabulary, so I was introduced to the vocabulary of travel. And I worked for a travel agency for 2 years before I finally went back to college. So I did get that degree. And along the way, as I, on the last week, the former manager had put together a tour for she and her friends. She was going to take 30 friends along on a bus trip to Eastern Europe, 6-nation bus trip, 30 days. Yugoslavia, Istanbul, Bulgaria, Romania, and Czechoslovakia. Now, even today, those names have changed. We don't have a Yugoslavia anymore. Czechoslovakia is different. But I took this 30-day tour, and in the book I have 2 chapters of 2 events that happened. One was a toasting the Winter Olympics with the Polish miners that we were at the same restaurant, and we toasted the Polish winner in one of the events. And the other was dancing in a lodge in Transylvania near Dracula's castle. Oh, I don't want to forget that one. So the next thing was going to happen. Back to Phoenix. And Hal lost his job. Economic conditions were bad. He lost his job, so I had to go to work, finally. And I found a job with American West Airlines. And it took me 4 interviews to finally get hired. But I worked for 5 years, and 4 of them in the pilot lounge. I didn't know how they were going to take it. But the office was revamping, and they were moving around, and they put me in the lounge so I could take uniform orders. We had 1,000 pilots, so I was busy. But I also found lots of other things to do. They were glad to have me around after they got used to me. They were a little mean at first. They thought I was a spy from the chief pilot, and they were going through negotiations to begin the union. But they finally got used to me, and they loved me. In fact, when economic conditions got bad again, and I was laid off my job, the pilots put together a petition. Please sign if you'd be willing to rehire Bonnie at $3 to $5 a month per pilot. I knew I would do that. It was too long. They told me that over 700 pilots had signed the petition.
Wow.
But management, if they hire one back, they have to hire another one back. They couldn't rehire everybody they fired, so I was gone. So I said, Hal, nobody wants us here. Let's move. We went to Florence, Oregon, where there was rain. I was so tired of 300 days of sunshine every year. I said, oh, it would be so lovely to see rain. I still like rain. So we went there and built a house, and I worked in the art field, took classes, entered exhibits. I did a lot of painting there. I sold most of them. So that was my time in art. Well, okay, now we have to go back to Osage. Our sisters were back here, and they were getting older, and kind of going downhill a little bit. And we thought, well, we ought to go back, get acquainted. We've been away from them our whole lives. Let's go back and get acquainted. So we came back to Osage. Within a month, I was in the Alpha Writers. And this is where I started writing real stories. I'd never written anything but a Christmas card, a Christmas letter, and I thought I did a good job. But it's the only writing I did. But there, I learned a good way to write essays, stories, poems. Ramona nudged us into poetry, which I started to do. So I had a wonderful time. And then, concurrently, Jean Kettleson in St. Ansgar started memoir writing. And that's where I started putting my little stories together. A little paragraph here, a little paragraph there. And learning the craft of writing. And before long, my yellow legal pad started shaping up. And I said, I think I've got a story here. So I hope you enjoy the story I leave with you. Thank you.